All right, and we're back. So we got 3 games today, 3 games, all of which have an opponent average rating of over 2100, and all of which have me playing at over 90% accuracy. So we're gonna get into some high-level chess today, and let's get into it. So my opponent plays e4, and I go c6, knight f3, d5, knight c3, takes, knight up, takes, and we're in a very simple line that can transpose to the Tartakower very quickly. My opponent goes bishop e2, bishop d6, very reasonable, castles, and the move d4, also a very reasonable move, and we're kind of out of the opening now. So I think here for a bit, and I realize that, okay, I want to develop my light squared bishop, then I want to develop my rook, then I want to play c5 and develop my knight to c6. Very reasonable stuff. So I go for bishop g4 here. Very simple. I'm putting pressure on the knight. If a bishop trade were to occur, I'd be happy. So I don't think the knight would be moving anytime soon. But he does. He goes knight h4. I take, and I go rook e8, completely taking over the e-file. And I already think that I'm kind of slightly better here. Also, I just a warning, I will be going a little bit fast in this video because I do want to not have this video be over like 45 minutes long because it is 3 games today. Yeah, rook e8, and my opponent goes for the move queen g4, a very reasonable move. And I decide that, okay, queen g4 makes sense. He might be trying to play some knight f5 in the future and maybe trade off my dark squared bishop. So I thought, well, after knight f5, I was considering bishop f8, but I decided, okay, how about we just make sure that knight f5 is an impossibility? So I go for this move, queen c7, and I think this is very reasonable. Queen c7, of course, targets the pawn on h2 and makes it kind of difficult for my opponent to make a move. But my opponent decides to defend it with the move knight f3. And I already think this is bad. Obviously, my opponent is going backwards, which is not a good sign with my opponent. So I am already realizing that I'm probably in the driver's seat here, and I should start to step up the gas. I decided to go for the move knight d7, which is reasonable, obviously, developing my knight. I thought c5 was a little bit dangerous right now because he had the move d5, and then I wouldn't be able to develop my knight to c6, which is the whole point. So I thought that c5 I could play at a later date, and at the moment knight d7 seems like the best way to play. Now my opponent goes bishop g6, and I decided to go for not g6, h6. I decided to go for g6. Technically I could have played bishop f8 here, but then I realized, okay, bishop f8 kind of glues my bishop to the pawn. Do I want my bishop back there right now? I'd rather play g6. The f6 square is always defended, so he never has a lobster pincer mate if the queen could get to f6 and then transpose off to g7, but he never has that, so I think I'm okay. And also I would have bishop f8 there, so I go for g6. My opponent realizes his mistake and goes back to e3 because he thinks that his bishop is bad there. And now I realize, okay. He just made 2 weakening moves, and all that to have accomplished, he's brought his bishop out, his bishop back, his knight out, his knight back. So he's made 2 moves. I must be better here because he just wasted so much time. So I realized, okay, I want to make progress in this position, but this position is very solid. So I thought the only way to make progress would be to go bishop f8 myself and actually decide to go to g7 with my bishop and decide to go for some f5 and develop my bishop out that way because my bishop isn't really doing anything along this diagonal. And after something like bishop f4, I think I'm okay. I can just bring my queen back to maybe c8 or d8, and I'll be all right. My opponent plays c3. First of all, just defending his pawn and making sure that after my bishop goes to g7, he will be defended along this diagonal. I go bishop g7 anyway because, I mean, that's my whole plan. Bishop f4, of course, attacking the queen. Now queen d8, putting the queen back in the home square and actually defending this diagonal as well. Very nice little move. And now the move rook e1, rook a e1, trying to take control of the file. And of course, if I allow him to take me, queen takes, he's able to control the file with his rook again, and I might be in some trouble. So I don't really like that. I decided to go for the move f5, which is kind of my whole purpose. I think must be good, right? Because I'm attacking the queen, I'm opening up my bishop, and I have pretty decent lines. First of all, my opponent takes, and plays the move queen h4. Very reasonable move. He's bringing his queen along this file, and the queen has lots of options to get into the position afterwards. Now, instead of acknowledging this queen h4 because it doesn't really have a threat, I decide to instead go for this move queen f8, which I think is very, very nice because also queen h4 does actually start bishop h6 ideas, and I don't want to trade bishops. I think my bishop is better than his, and queen f8 stops this idea, first of all. Secondly, it opens up the room for another rook to go to e8 and for me to take control of the e file once again, which is also my whole plan. Now he goes queen g3, second guessing where he wants to put his queen and deciding to put it on g3, preparing a battery to nowhere with his bishop, and I think I'm much better. I go knight f6, a reasonable move, trying to go knight h5, trade off one of these pieces. I'll get into a better endgame with bishop versus knight, and I should be better. Also, I have the idea to go knight e4 and get this nice outpost in my opponent's position. So it was kind of tough for my opponent to do anything. My opponent goes bishop g5, and I realize, okay, knight e4 kind of does the same thing. He trades off the bishop whenever I want, and I should be doing much better. Queen c7, reasonable, getting into my position. I take, and I play h6 first. And the reason why is because, of course, if I go for something like rook b8, or if I try to defend this with the queen, this f7 pawn could be weak in the future, and I want this knight to be kicked out for any future circumstance. And of course I can't play f6 because then he would have knight e6 and I'd actually be in some trouble there. So yeah, that's why I played h6, and my opponent took some time here. I remember this. My opponent took a lot of time here because he has an option. He can go here and maybe reroute some time along here, or he can go here and try to reroute like, I don't know, like this maybe, or like this. So he doesn't really have a very good square for his knight to go on, and he eventually chooses this square. He eventually chooses h3, and I think that's the worst square, and I have a decision to make now. Now I can go for a position where I queen trade. I can go for like queen c8 or queen d8. Of course I want to defend my b pawn, so probably queen c8 or queen b8. Or I can go for rook b8 and try to defend myself like that. And eventually I settled on rook b8, and I keep the queens on the board, and I think I could probably play this for a win, which is kind of what I'm been doing recently. I've kind of just been playing kind of every position for a win. So I play rook b8, very reasonable move, and my opponent goes knight f4. Another thing I wanted to do here, I was kind of considering the move g5, just trying to stop the knight from ever moving ever again, which is another reasonable move. It sacks this pawn, and it gets into a position where this knight doesn't really have any squares. I can go rook b8, my opponent will probably take here, I'll take here, and we'll get into a position where I'm down a pawn, but his knight is dead. And I'm pretty much just playing up a piece at this point, although my piece is not as good. Although my piece is not that good, so it's probably equal. Either way, I don't do that because I don't want to lose the pawn. I go rook b8, and my opponent comes back to f4. I go bishop f6, which I think is a reasonable move. Developing my bishop in a better way, ready to go on some other diagonals in the future, because I think that my bishop is actually misplaced on g7, looking into this diagonal of this massive stone wall blockade, and I don't want to do that. Now, queen a5, reasonable move, attacking the a7 pawn. I go a6, not much to say there, and queen b6, taking the b6 square that I just made a weakness on, but it's not actually that important, so I don't really care. Now I go bishop d8, which is kind of my idea. Queen back, and I go king g7, again the best move, realizing the threat on g6 because of this pin towards my king on g8. I don't want to blunder any pawns, so I'm not going to do that. Now my opponent comes back to the d3 square, and I have a feeling here that I'm getting outplayed, actually. I have a feeling that I'm getting outplayed. I feel like I've kind of lost the thread, and I have it, but it's still very equal. The only person who's going to win this at this point is white, but there's also lots of chances for the other side. And I go queen d6, which is just a reasonable move, kind of centralizing my queen. Maybe I'm targeting this pawn. Maybe I want to go over to the queen side. Maybe I want to do lots of things. Maybe I want to go queen c7 at some point. Maybe I want to go bishop c7. Maybe I want to bring my rook to e8. There's lots of ideas with queen d6. It's a very flexible move. And my opponent goes knight f5, reasonable. And I go queen e6, which is a big mistake. Yeah, what I should have played is probably queen c7 and keeping my ideas open. Also, if you're like really confused, the idea, of course, of knight e5 is attacking the f7 pawn, and that would be a very, very big big issue for me if I were to let that fall. So I can't do that. Either way, I go queen e6 and I offer a queen trade. The reason why this is bad, and this is just a really annoying reason, it's bad for a tactical reason. Let me show you. After queen e6 here, my opponent has knight d7, my rook moves, and this fork on my pawns, and I can't guard both of them. If I try to guard the one that makes the most sense, which is probably this one, I'd probably go like here or something. Knight b7, rook b8, and you're thinking, maybe I win this pawn, my opponent can take this, and I would just be down a pawn in an endgame, and I would be losing. Now, I didn't see that. That's kind of my only big mistake of the game, which is kind of... Oh, wait, there's another big mistake, but this is kind of the most annoying one. The queen e6 happens. My opponent plays queen a4, which is a big mistake. Queen a4. It's not a mistake, it's a miss. My opponent could have probably found that if he had calculated a bit more, but I mean, he calculated for a long time, he calculated for like a minute, and I guess he didn't see anything, so it gives me a second lease on life where I'm actually slightly better in this position. So I go bishop c7, of course, targeting the knight, and trying to, and making a threat of winning a pawn. So my opponent goes back, reasonable. I go rook e8, realizing that my b pawn is not very important anymore, because of course there's no attack on it. And if he ever tries to attack it, if he ever goes like here, I can always just take this pawn if I really need to. So my opponent goes queen b4. I go b5. I don't need to take the pawn immediately. I can go for this position, but I didn't really think that this was as good as it could have been. So I play b5 first, and I'm targeting the pawn. Now he goes here, and I think for a while, and I realize, okay, this position is probably better for me, and I have to be careful about what I do here. So the first thing I do is bishop d6, which is a very nice move. Basically, if he takes, I have this discovered attack, and I win the queen. Very reasonable. He has to be careful about that. So my opponent goes queen b6. Reasonable, of course, attacking my a6 pawn. And now I decide, okay, to go queen a2, defending my a6 pawn, grabbing a pawn, and giving up my c6 pawn for the a6 pawn. Now queen c6, and I make a big mistake. Oh my gosh, I make a big mistake. What I should have realized is that my queen is actually much better placed on a2, and I'm targeting a lot of pawns. But I go queen e6 because I thought, okay, that's the best way to defend my pieces. But I just completely miss, of course, rook e6, which has the same idea of bishop h2. So my opponent is threatened again and would have to lose another pawn, and of course I would be winning in that position. Now, I didn't see that. I should have seen that. Kind of embarrassing. But although I can go for that in the future, I didn't go for that then. And I went queen e6, which is a big mistake due to the move he played d5. And I went rook c8, reasonable. Of course, if he takes my queen, I take his queen. And this is winning for a very dank move. Winning because of queen b7. And I can't defend my pawn. I just can't defend my pawn. I go queen e8, he takes. If I go rook b8, of course, he can take my rook, desperado, and take my queen. There's no way to defend that pawn, and I would be losing in the resulting position. If I go here, of course, I drop the rook. Yeah, very unfortunate move, but he didn't see that, actually, and he just played the move queen a6, of course, losing the game to the same tactic earlier with bishop h2 check. So this was this game. I played at 92% accuracy. Very nice game, got me up to 2064, a new best. And we can get into the next game. And we're back in game number 2. So this game, I had the black pieces versus another 2100 opponent, MDV Ya. Yeah, so let's just get into it. E4, C6, D4, D5. Knight F3, takes, knight up, takes, and we're in a very simple target counter after the moves C3 and bishop D6. Very reasonable. And the move bishop D3. So that's just the opening phase. We're gonna skim past that because I know that you guys don't really care about the opening. It's very, I mean, it's just a lot of memorization at this point. It's not really, I don't know. Whatever. Let's just get into the game. I castle, reasonable. Knight E2, and I play a move that I've played a couple times in the past, which is this move bishop G4. And I like this move. I like this move a lot. Basically, it targets the knight, doesn't attack it, and it opens up for rook E8 in the future to put pressure on the knight even more. And I really do like this move. You can block with F3, but F3 is just a bad move. Of course, moving your pawn to F3 is just not good, as Ben Feingold says. So my opponent goes F3, obviously not having watched any Ben Feingold videos, and I go bishop H5, reasonable. Castles, rook E8, taking control of the E file, and bishop E4, F4. And I think here for a minute, and I think, okay, so I want to develop my knight to D7, right? I want to develop my knight to D7. Of course, that would drop the bishop at this point. Also, I kind of want to put my queen on D6. I really want to take back. I want to take back with my queen. So I realize I can force this. I can force him to do this. So I go queen C7. If you were to go bishop G3, I would have kept the tension. I wouldn't have touched it. I probably just played knight D7 and live with my life. Just have the staring contest with the bishops always there. Yeah. But he took. I recaptured, putting my queen on a good square. And my opponent goes for this move, queen up to D2. And he's, of course, trying to play the move knight F4, which is very reasonable. So I decide to, before making my opponent do that and get a knight on F4 for no cost, I go bishop G6 first, takes, and now my opponent goes rook D1. Very reasonable, rook E1, taking control of the E file. Well, not taking control because my rook is already there, but keeping some influence on the E file is a better way to say it. And I go for this move C5, which I think is very reasonable. He can't take because of this, of course. So my opponent has a very interesting decision, and my opponent goes for this move, queen F4, and I think for a while here, and I eventually come up with something I think is very, very nice. I come up with this move, queen B6, putting pressure on this pawn, keeping everything together and ready for when my opponent will try to defend this pawn, and this pawn probably with this move queen D2, which is what happens in the game. We can just play that. I'm able to play knight C6. I'm able to bring my rook to this file, and I'm able to put even more pressure on this pawn, which can quickly become a weakness because, as you can see, this queen also X-rays the king on the other side. So I have a very nice game. CD, knight D, and I play this move knight C6. Reasonable. The knight is pinned. The knight is pinned to the king, so the knight can't move, and king H1 happens. And now oh my gosh, I'm kind of embarrassed. Oh my gosh, I don't know why I played this move. I played the correct move later on, but I've played this move knight E5. I played this with knight E5, and at first glance it looks reasonable. Of course, it's trying to play knight C4 and pick up this pawn, but at second glance, after move B3, which is what he plays in the game, my knight isn't doing very much there, and I should have gone for the better plan, which is actually more concrete, which is this move rook E8. Also, if I play this move rook A8, I thought this was worse, and computer agrees. I thought this was worse because after something like this, defending, if I try to put more pressure, he's able to leave all of it with this rook trade, and probably just trade by knight, and then he wouldn't have a weakness on D4 anymore. So I didn't want that. So that's why I played rook E8, rook A1, and I played the move knight C6, of course, showing my opponent that I made a mistake, and I admit to it, so I should probably take it back, and I played the right move now. And he plays this great move. I think this is a great move, in all honesty. Computer hates it, but computer hates everything, so I don't care. I think this is a great move. Basically, the idea is I'm gonna double up. I'm gonna go rook d5, rook d8, and double up. And if my opponent just does nothing, like h3, I double up. I don't know how you're supposed to do nothing like this move. I double up. And if you try to defend your pawn like this, I'm able to play f5 and kick your rook out. And this is kind of game over. It's kind of game over here. So I thought that was very sweet. Actually, if I go rook here, he has this move. Incredible. If I go takes, he has rook e8 check. Takes. Actually, I wouldn't take. I'd probably not take. I'd probably go like, no, king h7 actually probably is bad. Oh man, that's very, very spicy. King h7. I guess it's fine because I have this move. Yeah. What does he have here? Rook d8. Yeah, rook d8, queen d8, queen h4 check here. Maybe not there. What if I go back? If I go king g8, I guess he can just take now. Okay. Yeah, and we get into a pawn endgame where I'm actually not winning, even though I probably have the better pawn structure. Either way. So that doesn't happen. My opponent goes for this move rook e3, which I thought was very reasonable, trying to get to the d3 square and defend his knight like that. I go rook d5, completing my plan. And my opponent goes f4, big mistake. Actually, it loses to the move knight here, pawn here, and then my opponent just has many, many weaknesses. I can go for this move rook d8. He can go, I guess, not there. He can go, I guess, here, and then this position is actually kind of miserable for my opponent because my queen can move around while his pieces are kind of stuck. Either way, f4, I go rook a8, I don't take. Rook d3, reasonable. And I go king f8, and I think, okay, I don't want to make any trades just yet. I want to go king f8. I'm moving my king one step closer. He doesn't have any checks. His king might go to g1, but that would be actually a big mistake because he's pinning his knight. And I thought that was must be better for me. I was not scared of that. My opponent goes h3, reasonable move, just a waiting move, just kind of simmering on the position. And I take, rook takes, pawn takes, and we get into a position where my opponent has an isolated pawn. And yes, it is an isolated pawn. It is technically a passer, but I don't really consider it a passer. I kind of consider this pawn to be more of a weakness than a strength. So I think I'm actually slightly better. And I go rook d5, which I think is a good move. My rook is now controlling the entire file, the entire rank, the entire fifth rank. I'm able to play queen d6 at will. If I get a queen trade, I thought that rook endgame could be winning. It could be a draw, but I think it's probably the best chance. Now, queen e3. I'm the only one who can win this game, by the way, just so you know. I'm the only one who could win this game. I go queen e6, queen c3, and I think for a while here, because I do really want to play queen d6. If I get queen d6 off, I'm much better. But queen d6 never works because then my opponent infiltrates with the move queen c8, and I'm actually doing much worse. I'd have to, yeah, just to show you, this move comes, I'd have to block, and now my opponent can probably take here, take, and you get into this endgame where it is just clearly a draw, and there's nothing to play for. So I don't want to get into this. And my opponent, luckily, doesn't go for that. I mean, well, actually, no, I just don't go for that. I go queen d7, not allowing him in, not allowing the draw. Rook d2, and I go for this move g5, and I think this is well timed. Maybe I could have timed it better, but it is kind of the only way to improve. After takes, I'll take with the rook, and I'll get my rook more active. I'll get some pieces on the king side. I don't know. I have a position. I'm trying to win it. Anything is possible. Takes. Technically, FG is better, actually, which is very interesting. Idea maybe to play g6 in the future. It's very interesting, but I don't do that. Rook G, queen d3, a very well timed move. Defending the pawn and ready to push it, actually, and I don't want this pawn to push. So I think for a while here, and I play this move queen f5. Also, the other idea, by the way, is to get into h7. So I was considering king g8 as well. We go king g8. This is just clearly a draw after this move d5. So I don't want to go for that. It takes queen d3. I go queen f5, and my opponent obliges. I thought here that maybe he didn't have to queen trade. Maybe he could have done something else, like queen c3, for example, and try to keep going with the position. But and maybe he has some winning chances here, I'm not sure. Because at first I thought that I had this move queen f1, and then I might have some checks onto my opponent, but he's actually completely safe, and I have no way to win the game there. So my opponent trades, king up. My opponent cannot get past. Now g4, and now here's the big move. Do I play the correct move or do I play the incorrect move? I play the incorrect move. I play rook f3. And at first it looks like a good move, but it is not, because it actually just allows my opponent to get one square further. King g2, very reasonable. And this was my idea. Rook e3 was my idea. Now it's a draw, but the best move here at first actually is to play rook f4, targeting the pawn, and actually being able to solidify my rook on f4 with this move g5 in the future. And this is something I could have seen if I had thought hard enough, but unfortunately that's not how it worked out. And yeah, that's not how it worked out. I go rook f3, king up, and here my whole idea, maybe I can get to the back rank. He can't actually come forward because I win the h3 pawn. He goes h4, reasonable. I go to the back rank, king up. I go king up myself. Rook here. I go rook here, attacking the pawn. King up. And I thought he blundered. So I go rook h1. And I mean, it looks like he blundered because this pawn is very weak. He has to push it, which he does. And then I'm able to go for some other stuff. The best move here, which is actually the last try, is g6. This is kind of the last try. g6 is kind of the only way to play for black. After g6, my opponent has to take, kind of, and takes. I get these pawns undoubled, and I actually have a very decent version of the position. I could easily win this. This doesn't happen. I don't play g6. I play rook g1, reasonable. My opponent plays king e4, and yeah, he resigns. Pretty funny ending, but either way, I still won the game. So I'm kind of still proud of myself. I played this game at 94.1% accuracy, if I believe. Yeah, I had 0 blunders. I had like 1 miss and a couple inaccuracies, but all in all, very nice game. And let's get on to game number 3, the final game. All right, so now we're in the last game. My opponent is Barifil, who is, I believe, 21-12 when we played the game. Now he's only 21-3 because I totally beat him and I got the 2082. This game was very short because, of course, I played really well. I played at 97.7% accuracy, and let's get into it. My opponent plays, I play d4 because I like this move best. Knight f6, the Dembowski, e6, e4, bishop e7, e5, here, takes, and now I've learned from my mistakes. I used to play the move c4 here. I used to think the c4 is very decent, but it's actually not. The best move is knight c3, blocking the c pawn and going for a position where you go f4 instead. So I go for this now. Now b6, I play what I know. I play f4, gets an inaccuracy. It really should, and drops my advantage from plus 0.8 to plus 0.5, plus 0.7. It's plus 0.69 here. Yeah, plus 0.69, plus 0.7. Really, a really big difference. Oh man. Oh wow. I really need that plus 0.2. Plus 0.1.5. Plus 0.15. Oh wow. So much. Anyway, f4. Bishop b7. I go knight f3. Simply the best move, developing my knight. Very simple. Knight d5. I capture the knight. This is a very interesting thing. Okay. So this knight is going to live here if I don't capture it. The knight is going to come over here. The knight is going to come over here. Knight is going to annoy me. I don't like this knight. So I just take it out of the equation and I realize, okay, my opponent has to capture with the bishop. Of course, if my opponent captures the e-pawn, this is death. His bishop is locked away permanently, staring into the back of his own pawn. He's never getting out. If he ever plays c5, I will play the move c3, and I will be completely winning. So my opponent, of course, doesn't do that. My opponent takes the bishop. But this allows to move c4, and as you can see, there's a reason why this is called the big center variation, because I have 4 pawns in the center restricting him, and I'm actually almost winning the game. So I do one more thing. I develop my bishop d3, and luckily we end the game in style. It's not really the end of the game just yet, but it's a very nice little move. Castles, and I get bishop h7 off, which is, of course, the Greek gift sacrifice, which my opponent forgot about, and I remembered. Yeah, bishop h7 is just a very nice move. My opponent goes here. I'll show you the idea. If you've never heard of a Greek gift sacrifice, basically bishop h7, knight g5, and queen h5, checkmate. So let's just see. Bishop h7, up, king g8, queen h5, and this is basically checkmate. The only move my opponent actually has here is this move, queen here, and I mean, if you can't win this position, I mean, maybe chess isn't your game. So, yeah. Also, for example, if my opponent goes up, which is what most people do, I would go probably queen g4. Probably queen g4. This loses a bit of advantage, but it's actually, no, it doesn't. It doesn't lose any advantage. Queen g4 is the best move. It just took the engine a little bit of time to think about it. And this is over. I mean, f5, I go ef, queen f, and I mean, knight e4. This is just GG's. I win the queen. I'm gonna win the game. Yeah. So my opponent doesn't go into that. My opponent doesn't take the bishop and says, "Okay, I'm down a pawn. I have to try and win this." But then I realize, wait, it's still lost. He doesn't actually have any way. He didn't help himself at all because I just go knight g5, right? And my queen is actually coming into the h5 square no matter what. Actually, he does stop this. He does stop this. He goes g6, stopping my queen from going to h5, but it's still lost. Knight g5 is a very nice move. It opens up my queen. It defends my bishop. Actually, even if he could take my bishop, it'd be still over because queen h5 would be the same checkmate. So he goes g6, and now I go for this move h4, which is very interesting. Maybe queen g4 was better. Maybe there's a case for it. Maybe I should have played queen g4, but still, it's completely reasonable. Both moves are fine. Idea of queen g4, of course, to go to h4 and checkmate. H4 first, of course, the idea being h5, and I want to open up the king even more. And my opponent goes f6, which is the last inaccuracy of the game because it allows me to play the move, which is very nice, bishop g6. And now the second brilliant move of the game, actually. 2 brilliants in one game. Very nice. And after fg, my opponent kind of just resigns here. I mean, there's nothing you can do. It's either fg or be miserable for the rest of the game. So fg and queen h5, and my opponent simply resigns. And I win another game at 97.7% accuracy against my 2100 opponent. 3 2100s in a row. I'm up to 2,082, 18 points away from 2100 myself. I'm very proud of this game. I mean, I'm very proud of all these games, actually. And I'm just really, really happy that I'm probably going to be 2100 soon. Yeah, so that's it. I hope you enjoyed. Hope you guys found this instructive. Yeah, good evening and good night.